Well, happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to our 2022 budget webinar. It's been a long, short week, and I'm very happy to be here with you all. My name is Nicole Martel, and I'm the Executive Officer of Policy and Advocacy with Alberta Municipalities, and I am also the Executive Officer of Policy and Advocacy here with the team. This is our fourth time hosting our budget webinar, and we greatly appreciate your time and engagement, especially this late in the day on a Friday. And I will not be dismayed if you have your favorite Friday beverage handy for our discussion. We have nearly 400 members registered for today's webinar, which is excellent. Putting together our analysis of the 2022 budget is a team effort. And we have our president and Alberta Municipalities staff here to respond to your questions. This includes our president, Mayor Kathy Heron, Dan Root, our CEO, Rachel DeVos, our Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy, Jeff Henwood, our Director of Government Relations, Darren Reedy, our Manager of Welcoming and Inclusive Communities and our in-house financial guru, Jody Dittrich, our Policy Analyst and Lead for Governance in Small Communities, Clint Neufeld, our Policy Analyst and Lead for Infrastructure. And in addition to that, we have our Senior Director of Finance, Lisa Branter, who volunteered, and yes, I said volunteered, to support our analysis and joined us late last night to crunch numbers after the budget. In addition to our team, we know that many of you will have questions that we will not be able to answer. So we're grateful to have a couple of guests from Alberta Municipal Affairs joining us today. Sitting with us are JD Cleaver, who's the Director of Policy and Strategy for the Grants and Education Property Tax Division, and Christine Bigare, who is the Director of Tax Programs and Assessment Audit. As you can tell from their titles, JD and Christine know their numbers, and they are their go-to folks for our advocacy team when we have questions about grants and taxes. I would like to thank them for being so responsive to us and for supporting us today. Just a reminder, our guests are administrative officials and here to help provide clarification on the numbers, not to answer questions about budget decisions that were made at a political level. To quickly review the logistics for this webinar, only presenters will be able to use their mics and cameras, but there are still ways for you to participate and engage with presenters and other attendees. I can see you're busy engaging already, so you know the drill. We will be taking questions throughout the session. You can post your questions by clicking on the Q&A symbol at the bottom of your screen. Just type in your question and we will make our best effort to respond to as many questions as possible. You also have the option to use the chat box, which is found on the bottom of your screen. This is where you can post comments and chat with others in this session, but it's not for posting questions to the speakers. If you have a question for a speaker, it must be posted in the Q&A box, not the chat box. Questions posted in the chat box will not be answered, so please make sure to put it into the Q&A box. Also, when you're posting in the chat, make sure you have selected all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your comments. This is especially important if you're trying to communicate with other attendees. Note that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted publicly on our YouTube channel next week. We will try to answer as many of your questions as we can, but for those we can't get to, we will follow up in the coming days. Please be sure to visit our budget webpage for updates as well. And now I get to turn things over to our Alberta Municipalities President, Mayor Kathy Heron, to make opening comments. I will just mute myself, Kathy, and over to you.
I will unmute. Are we going to have an echo? Just turn your volume down.
Give me 1 second.
That's all good. There, that's good. All right. Sorry, everyone. We're all in a big boardroom together here today. So thanks for joining us. I know Nicole said that, but I'll say it again. We're calling it Budget Analysis Happy Hour. It is a Friday and it is late, so it is great to see 400 people register for this webinar. I'm going to provide a few highlights and then turn things over to the Alberta Municipalities team to go through the analysis that they have been feverishly working on over the past 24 hours so that they could share it with you and this afternoon. I always like to kick things off on a positive note. The province is to be congratulated for tabling a back to balance budget. While my congratulations are sincere, as a municipal leader, I do need to point out that there are many factors that help the province achieve that balance. One of them is the downloaded costs and responsibilities that municipalities continue to take on. We have highlighted some examples of downloading in the priority section of our analysis document, which you will be receiving soon. In some cases, downloading is direct, as in the case of policing costs. In other cases, municipalities are being pushed to take on additional responsibilities because the province and the federal government are not fulfilling growing needs that fall within their jurisdictions. This is particularly acute when we think about healthcare and social services. Underinvestment in areas like affordable and seniors housing puts pressure on other locally and provincially delivered service. We are particularly disappointed that while this budget pays lip service to affordable housing, the numbers don't back it up. There are some positive signs of investment in healthcare, including mental health and addictions, and we will continue to monitor these files closely to ensure that Albertans throughout the province benefit from the investment. Speaking of Albertans, they are about to receive a 1.5% increase in their provincial education tax. While we appreciate that this is lower than the 3.1% increase forecasted in last year's budget, we believe it would have been better that if the provincial government had frozen this tax altogether. While the province has many options to increase its general revenue, property taxes are municipalities' primary source of revenue. As municipalities, we have worked diligently to keep property tax increases to a minimum in the face of increased expenses resulting from provincial downloading costs and responsibilities, along with inflationary pressures. We believe homeowners and businesses would have benefited from a break from this tax increase in light of the difficult economic times Albertans have endured during the pandemic. After all, there is only one taxpayer. I want to go back to the positive, but before I turn things over to the team. Alberta municipalities and our members have been beating the broadband drum for some time now, and Budget 2022 signals the province has heard us. Over the next 4 years, the province will invest $390 million in broadband projects for underserved communities. $240 million of this brand new money, and if the province is successful in getting the feds to match, the total available pot could reach as high as $780 million. We have flagged our members' concerns with program requirements associated with the federal government's Universal Broadband Fund, and the Minister of Service Alberta has expressed a willingness to explore better ways to allocate the investment. We are also reaching out to the ministry to pursue the recommendation passed by our members that a provincial strategy is still needed to better coordinate broadband investment in order to enhance the access many of our communities so desperately need. Discussion on how to spend millions of dollars is a great way to start a conversation about a strategy. On that happy note, I'm going to turn things over to Rachel DeVos to take us into the deeper analysis.
Thanks so much, Kathy. So first of all, everyone, we were really hoping that we would be able to give you a Friday afternoon gift of an analysis document. Oh, and you can't, there we go, in your inbox this afternoon. But unfortunately, the MailChimp has decided to clock off early this Friday and rejected our request to send out the PDF. So I know that our marketing and communications team is working right now to get it posted on our website. So it should be available for everybody shortly. But we will be sharing on the screen, so that's no problem. We'll just walk you through kind of a high level overview of, oh, somebody is really on the ball. Lucy Henry has already found it on our webpage. I really enjoy the fact that some of our members are paying that close attention to our website. And maybe I could get somebody from the advocacy or marketing team just to post that in the link. So for those who really are eager to follow along, they can do so. So overall, and thanks so much, Chai Wei. Overall, we took an approach of really digging through the fiscal plan and the ministry's business plan to focus on the areas that are most important to municipalities. We've highlighted a few priorities, and these are kind of the priorities of the priorities, because we know that our members, so much impacts your communities, that is actually tough this year to decide what we feature upfront in our priorities. But certainly, and Darren will get into this later. We really delve into the investments in community infrastructure, the property tax freeze. Broadband is a huge one, and it was nice to see some good news there. I know all of our members, the first question we usually get is what happens with REITs and CARES, and it looks like things are quite flat for a number of the priority files, which Jeff will get into later. My friend Shay, who owns Baseline Wines in Sherwood Park, when I asked him a few years ago how his business was doing, and this was at a time when the economy was struggling, he's like, things are flat, but flat is the new up. So he's like, I'm okay. But last night I texted him and I said, I think we need to revise this with the inflationary pressures that everybody's facing. Unfortunately, flat is now the new down. So we'll all have to, make some of the funding stretch as we're dealing with those inflationary pressures. But I really hope that you appreciate and that you do find in this document answers to the questions that you had about the budget. And I'm not going to belabor this too much. I think I'm going to turn things over to Darren right now so he can really get into the meat of the core capital funding for municipalities, which is probably the number one thing that you are all interested in. So take it away, Darren.
All right, good afternoon. As Rachel mentioned, capital funding is usually the big topic. So let's get started. This is a list of the core capital funding that we've seen in the budget. This is a standard table you see in our analysis each year. So we start off with looking at MSI capital. And so last year, the province announced that it was going to be deferring and delaying the start of the local government fiscal framework and instead extend MSI for 2 more years. They messaged it as a 3-year plan, averaging about $722 million per year. So what they did was they front loaded the majority of that funding, about $1.2 billion in 2021. And as a result, when you look at the 2022 column, we see a big drop down to $485 million. And that's going to be the case again for 2023. So at the individual level, in your own municipality, you are going to see a considerable change in your funding this year. And hopefully you've still got some funds left over from last year's front loading of the funding. Hope you're not hearing the train that's going by now at this point, but so that funding is going to come down. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the impact at the allocation level for you in just a moment. Then you can see in the next line down, local government fiscal framework. That is the capital funding that is set out in the Local Government Fiscal Framework Act that is set to start in 2024. That budget line item is set at $722 million. So you can see here the province's messaging last year to say that the 3-year plan between 2021 to 2023 would average $722 million. And then they're starting LGFF at $722 million. And obviously Alberta Municipalities has some concerns about that. And the members have also expressed that. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. Water for Life, a slight drop from 42 million down to 37 million. But actually that number was expected to be quite a bit lower, but looking through the budget documents, we can see that there was some of the 2021 budget that was not spent, and as such seems to have been carried forward into the 2022 year. The same thing applies for Municipal Water and Wastewater Partnership, where again, we were expecting a much steeper decline in that funding based on what was forecasted last year. This year it's set at 62 million. Again, looking at the budget documents, it seems that some of that funding from last year was not used in the 2021-2022 fiscal year, and as such has been carried forward. The Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Program also a small drop of about $8 million this year. And then lastly, the First Nations Water Tie-in Program gets a big jump to 30 million, but this is the final year of that program. Then looking down a bit further into the next section, these grants are ones that are tied to federal funding. So you can see the Canada Community Building Fund, or as everyone more commonly knows it as the Gas Tax Fund, as it was renamed last year. That's going to be set again stable at 255 million for this year. And you're going to see it jump up to 266 million in the next year. And that is based on the Canada Community Building Fund's inflationary measure. It's tied, it has a 2% inflationary measure. So you see about every 2 years, it jumps by about 100 million, $110 million. Green Trip is coming to an end. So it's set down to 18 million. Clean Water Wastewater Fund at 13 million. Again, that program is coming to an end. The Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program does look, does look positive at 152 million, but the sorry news is all of that funding is allocated. So there's no new dollars to apply for. Those dollars are allocated, and it's just a matter of going through the province's books as an expense in the year. And then the Public Transit Infrastructure Fund, also, again, the program coming to an end. That $8 million represents the final spending there. So you can see overall, including the Calgary Edmonton LRT, that's where you see a large jump in the year, about 222 million increase in the year. And that trend is going to continue as part of, this is I believe a 10-year PUP, something along those. It's going to end in 2026, I believe. It's a long-term transit funding for Calgary and Edmonton, linked to federal and provincial funding. So overall, you see year-over-year change between 2021 budget and 2022 budget, a decline of about 25% in overall funding, and that is primarily driven by the $711 million decline in MSI capital. So for those that like the visual, instead of the table of numbers, you can kind of see the breakdown here of what has gone up and what has gone down. Again, the majority of programs are seeing a decline this year, particularly, of course, the MSI, which again was previously communicated and put out by the province, and as well as Alberta Municipalities. We've done a couple of articles in the weekly newsletter on this. And on that note, if you're not getting that weekly newsletter, this is your tip to make sure you go to the website and sign up. It's a free newsletter. If you're not signed up, you can go to the news section at abmunis.ca and make sure you're getting those notifications. So moving on down, just a little bit of more detail talking about MSI. You can see here that the MSI operating, for those that are certainly rely on that operating component of MSI operating, that is maintained at 30 million this year. And you can see here that the LGFF operating is also listed. So in Municipal Affairs business plan, they do note that when 2024 comes around, that when LGFF, or Local Government Fiscal Framework, starts, that they have budgeted 30 million there in that line item. We have not engaged with them in any type of way yet in terms of the design of the LGFF operating or the vision for that program, but it's good to see that as a placeholder in the province's budget to know that there will be some form of operating support when MSI ends. So as it relates to your local, now we've kind of talked about the big picture dollars in terms of MSI. There's a couple of changes that you should be aware about for your budget this year, and some of the changes that are expected. So because, I'll just scroll back up here, because you see this big decline from 1.196 billion down to 485 million, MSI capital includes two components, the MSI capital formula and the BMTG formula, which is the basic municipal transportation grant. And each of them has some complexities associated with them. And as a result of the total funding dropping by 711 million, the province has opted to move away from using the allocation formula in 2022 and 2023 and has made a decision, and this was announced in, I think, October, to fix your allocation for 2022 based on 40.6% of whatever amount you received in 2021. And that will be repeated in 2023. So your allocation in 2022 this year is going to be 40.6% of whatever you received last year. And that's going to apply across the board. So every municipality, and this is part of the reason why the province made this decision, and because of the complexities of the formula and this significant decline in the funding pool, decided that if all municipalities, it would be fair for all municipalities to share the same drop in funding. So everyone will see about a 60% cut in their funding in 2022. In terms of MSI operating allocations, those are fixed at whatever you received in 2021 for MSI operating. That is what you are going to receive in 2022 and 2023. And then moving forward, when we start talking about the local government fiscal framework. So this has been a long-standing advocacy project. For those of you that are new to council, MSI started in 2007, and that's been a mainstay program in terms of capital funding for municipalities. In, I think it was around 2016, Alberta municipalities started taking a very proactive approach to looking at redesigning that. And that advocacy has resulted in what is now known as the Local Government Fiscal Framework Act. And there are many wins in terms of what that act delivers compared to what MSI offers. But the big challenge of it is still comes back to the revenue adequacy. And this is where you can see in this chart, the principle of revenue adequacy of LGFF is a concern. It's not being met. As you can see, historical funding for MSI and BMTG has generally averaged anywhere from 1.1 to 1.2 billion per year. But you can see that starting in about 2015, the province has slowly started to reduce the funding down. And particularly when LGFF starts in 2024, it is about 37% lower than what municipalities would have received over the previous 10 years. That is a concern, and certainly members have raised that through resolutions at convention and municipal leaders caucus. And so we have marching orders from you in terms of advocacy to seek a couple of changes to LGFF before it is implemented. One is increasing the base amount, of course. There's no surprises there. And the second is the fact that because the LGFF is linked to changes in provincial revenue, right now the funding is set up so that the program is set up such that whatever the province's revenue goes up or down by, the LGF funding will only go up or down by 50% of that. And so one of the advocacy goals for Alberta municipalities is to have that revenue index limitation removed such that the funding will match whatever change there is in the province's revenue. Of course, one of the things that you might have a question about, well, what is my allocation going to be under LGFF? And that's always an interesting topic. The province has identified in their business plan and under municipal affairs business plan that they're certainly committed to working on finalizing the details of LGFF in 2022. Alberta municipalities will be making a presentation on this at the Spring Municipal Leaders Caucus in just a couple of weeks from now. So if you haven't signed up for there's your plug to make sure you show up in Edmonton for the Municipal Leaders Caucus. Now moving on to operating funding, not any major changes here. It's basically, I guess, what we expected or what we anticipated coming into the budget based on conversations with the minister. The only major change in core operating funding for municipal governments is the Alberta Community Partnership. And it's really a non-issue because the reason that the budget was significantly higher or is in 2021 was because the province in that year delivered about $10 million through the Alberta Community Partnership that went directly to municipalities to compensate for the extra work involved in managing the voting process for the provincial referendums and the Senate nominee during the 2021 fall municipal election. So that has been removed from the budget back to the generally normal level for ACP funding. All the other grants have remained flat. Whether you consider that a positive or a negative, I guess it kind of goes back to Rachel's comment about whether flat is a positive, or I think it's very arguable that a lot of these programs, if not all of these programs, have actually been flat for many years. I'm thinking back, I think Family and Community Support Services funding, I think, has been flat since about 2017. And grants in place of property taxes, that's actually been a decline over the recent years. That's still an ongoing concern that the province is only covering about 50% of the property taxes that would normally be owed on properties that are exempt because they are provincially owned. That remains an advocacy goal of Alberta municipalities to get that reversed so that the province is covering the full amount. And the full amount would be about 59 to 60 million. And as you can see, the budget for that line item is about 30 million. Funding for the municipal policing grant and the police officer grant remain flat as well, and we are led to believe that those two programs are actually going to be consolidated under one program. We just don't know what the new name of that will be. Moving on to education property taxes. As Rachel and Kathy alluded to, there is a small increase. So the previous 2 years, the education property taxes were fixed at about $2.47 billion. There is a small increase this year going into 2022. And that is a result of a couple of different things. So in 2019, the province set out a plan to say that going forward, education property taxes would increase in accordance with population plus inflation. Then the province, as the pandemic hit, the province moved away from that and just froze the education property tax. Now that I guess moving out of the pandemic, if that's what you want to frame it as, the province has decided that the economic environment is still not strong enough to move towards a program that's tied to population plus inflation. As such, what they've decided to do is increase the education property tax equivalent to the increase in K-12 operating K-12, like Alberta Education's operating expense. So tying it directly to that, so you can see moving down here that the provincial education property tax is shown here as 2.504 billion. Just to clarify, this is excluding the PERC program. So technically the total provincial education property tax is 2.519, so about $15 million higher than this. We just pulled the number straight from the budget and was since informed by municipal affairs staff that it's actually 2.519, but there is a $15 million credit that will come through the PERC program, which stands for the Provincial Education Requisition Credit, which provides support to municipalities that are unable to collect the education property tax on delinquent oil and gas properties. So my understanding that primarily, if not all, goes directly to municipal districts, but that program is there to support those municipalities that are facing those fiscal challenges in collecting on taxes owed. K-12 education operating expense will increase slightly in the year. And I guess a positive of this is provincial education property tax is increasing, but not to the degree that it was planned. So in this graph, if you can see the mouse, this yellow line represents what provincial education property tax was planned to do in relation to K-12 operating expense. Instead, the line is much more flat. We're going to see that provincial education property tax is going to be closer to about 30% of K-12 operating expense. So that's a positive that we're not seeing the province increase education tax despite no plans to be increasing education operating expense to any degree. And the last one I'll mention here is we'd like to highlight some notable programs that support community entities, thinking about the agricultural service boards and agricultural societies in your community. So it's always helpful information for us to provide this. So you can see that again the figures remain fairly flat except for the community facility enhancement program. this supports not municipalities, but communities to build or to upgrade or replace community facilities. And there's a nice jump there by about $20 million or 108% increase. And that is the messaging we've seen from the provinces suggests that that's actually just taking that funding back to pre-pandemic levels when it used to be about $38 million. And then the community initiatives program, that's dropping down to 20.7 million. And that's a result of the program called a stabilized program that was a one-time support program that has now ended. And for those that are interested in the economic side, of course, the REDAs, the Regional Economic Development Alliances funding is maintained at just under $500,000. But the CARES program, the Community and Regional Economic Support Program that was suspended in 2020, that still is suspended and no funding for that program. So have to rely on the REDA funding to make that progress. So that wraps up my presentation. I'm now pleased to turn it over to Jeff Henwood.
Well, thank you very much, Darren. Thank you very much, Darren. I really appreciate you turning it over to me, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll give a brief overview of the fiscal plan and some of the key ministry highlights that Darren didn't touch on. So in the fiscal plan, there is growth and revenue across almost all categories, including corporate taxes, income taxes, and perhaps most significantly, non-renewable resource revenue, which is leading to projected revenue of $62.6 billion. Overall expenditures are expected to decrease slightly to $62.1 billion as supports related to COVID-19 are reduced. This will result in an anticipated surplus of $511 million in fiscal 22-23 and small surpluses projected in outlying years. In terms of debt, taxpayer supported debt is supposed to hit or is projected to hit $94.7 billion this year. There is some debt up for renewal that the province is letting mature and will pay off. In terms of ministry highlights, some things that Darren didn't touch on. In children's services, you see the result of the early learning and childcare agreement signed between the province and the government of Canada in late 2021 coming into effect. So with several $100 million being spent to reduce childcare costs. In community and social services, FCSS or Family and Community Support Services, funding is being maintained at $100 million. There's a small increase in education funding. In health, you see $100 million in annual spending dedicated to expanding acute care capacity, as well as a $750 million COVID contingency fund to deal with unexpected expenses and to reduce the surgical backlog that has resulted from the pandemic. Darren touched on MSI and many things like that, so I will skip over that. But before I kick it back to our moderator, Nicole, to get us into the Q&A, I'll just comment that moments ago, the Premier did shuffle his cabinet. So we look forward to working with, engaging, and advocating a new Minister of Labour, Casey Madhu, and the new Minister of Justice and Solicitor General, Tyler Shandro, as they take on their new portfolios. So with that, I will throw it back to Nicole.
Thank you for that, Jeff. I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay. We're just adjusting our volume here in the room a little bit. And I do see we have some questions popping up. Just a reminder to please put your questions into the Q&A in the chat. And we do have a question, and it is from Allison Garrett's, and the question's on LRT funding. And looking at, great to see that the LRT funding for the two big cities, but is advocacy being contemplated for public transit infrastructure dollars for everyone else? Seems like all other transit systems are being left out of the equation. So I believe I will be turning this to Clint to answer. So Clint will be popping on his camera and he will give an answer for us live.
Hi, yeah, so members did pass a resolution.
Hello, Clint.
Hi, can you hear me?
Just get you to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, sorry about that. So members did pass a resolution on transit funding in 2020 related to operating expenses. So we set that up to Alberta Transportation, and the response was kind of like you mentioned. They reiterated their commitments to LRT projects and the such. So we've also been working to just advocate for transit where we engage with the provincial and federal governments. So our submission to the national infrastructure, for instance, we heavily mentioned the need for increased transit infrastructure dollars. And as well, when we were sending our submission on the development of the Infrastructure Accountability Act, the new piece of legislation that Alberta Infrastructure is using to prioritize their capital projects going forward. And that also came with a 20-year capital plan. So we are definitely advocating for transit for all municipalities. And we also have a request into the Minister of Transportation regarding a very recent federal government announcement that was, I believe, $750 million for municipalities for transit that required a commitment of some kind from the provincial government. So we're looking for an answer for that one, and we'll share it out to members in the weekly when we receive that.
That's great, Clint. Thank you so much for that. I have another question that I'm going to turn to now in the question and answer box, and a reminder to please put your questions into the box for us. And this question is from Cheryl, and she's wondering, when will we be able to apply for the policing grants and what qualifications will be needed? I'm going to turn this over to Rachel here, and she will tackle your question, Cheryl. Thank you.
So thanks. That's a great question, Cheryl. And I'm actually answering this on behalf of my colleague, Kelly Santa Rosa, who has become, over the past several years, our in-house policing expert, to the extent that she's not here today because she's actually in a meeting about policing. And I think Chai Wei, she did, we have a bit of a group chat going on here to help answer your questions. And Chai Wei just put a link to information on the Municipal Policing Assistance Grant. So any a municipality that is part of is an MPSA is eligible for this grant, and I believe they get it automatically without having to apply. But there is more information on the website. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm just taking a look now, and we have a question about GPOD, and it is, with the GPOD remaining stable at $30 per year, but provincial infrastructure being built, does this effectively reduce the amount expected for each property? And we have an expert here to answer this, and I'm going to turn it over to Christine, and she will take your question.
Hi, thank you for the question. I think for 2022, we can expect that the $30 million budget would be sufficient to continue funding GPOD at the existing payment level of 50% for most properties.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. We have another question here from Rick. Rick is wondering, can you identify the CFEP is available to municipalities? I was under the impression that this is only available to not-for-profits.
That is
I'm
correct.
going to turn it over to, okay, I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to JD.
Hi, everyone. While this isn't a Municipal Affairs Department, my understanding is that it continues to be only available to not-for-profits. If there is a change, I still would encourage you to go to their website and just confirm that, but I believe it's only not-for-profits at this time.
Thank you. And I see, was Darren up as well? Did you want to tackle that, Darren? I think you're good. Okay. Oh, we got a couple questions in the chat. Okay. So let me just look. Okay. So in the chat, we have a question from Ken. Any information update on how the province intends on funding APPS transition? Who wants to tackle that fun question? Do you want to give it a shot? Okay, we've got a volunteer. One moment, I'll mute myself.
Ken, there is no indication we can see in the budget. I guess part of that would be that the province has not indicated officially that they do plan to pursue that. They're still in the consultation phase, so there is no reference to potential funding of that. But obviously, if the province were to decide to do that, there would be significant financial implications, and perhaps look forward to a future budget that would explain how the province plans to pay for that.
Thank you, Jeff. I see we have a question, and it's from Jonathan. Is the amount quantified that the government of Alberta will profit on debt issued to municipalities? Darren, we're going to turn this over to you to tackle.
Sure. So if you're not familiar, there was a notice in, I believe it was December, announcing that the government of Alberta would no longer provide below market rate loans to municipalities. So we did look into the budget in this, and there is a line item under the investment income part of the fiscal plan. It does highlight, for context, in the 2021 budget, the loans to local authorities, the investment income was estimated to be or budgeted to be 150 million. They forecasted 120 million. And this is where it does raise a few alarm bells, but of course we don't have details as to why, but it does show that revenue increase in 2022 to increase from about 120 million last year to 185 million in 2022. And then that will increase to 290 million and then increase again to 337 million in 2024. So it's a considerable jump, almost triple in 3 years. So what that is unknown to us is that it purely a driver of the change in lending rates, or could it be due to increased volume, or could be other factors there that we don't know about. But we did highlight and note that the investment income from loans to local authorities is going to increase considerably, and so we'll have to do some further discussions with the Municipal Affairs or Alberta Treasury Board and Finance to get clarification on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. So, okay, I have another question that popped up. Lending rates would have corresponding increase to interest expense. Oh, it's a comment more than a question. Okay. Oh, I do have a Q&A in the Q&A box. Okay, hi, Rhonda. So in last night's town hall, Minister McIver stated that he wanted municipalities to put their heads together and come up with a formula they can agree on and present for an LGF funding formula plan. Isn't that what Alberta Munis has already done in asking that the index 50% revenue formula be adjusted to 100% revenue? That is a satisfactory solution that has been presented to Municipal Affairs is 75%. The next discussion has 100% been firmly turned down. Is the ministry open to further discussion based on what sounds like a deal done that Darren presented? And I'm going to turn it over to, yeah, or would you like to? We've got a couple people who are vying. I'm just going to figure out who's going to tackle.
I'll jump in first, Dan, and then you can take over. So hi, everyone, and thanks for the question. Rhonda, I think the question that was asked to McIver yesterday during his town hall was not about how the pot of money will grow, but how that pot of money will be allocated. And so what Darren was referring to in his speaking notes was that during our Municipal Leaders Caucus, we're going to start presenting some initial ideas on Alberta municipalities' thoughts on how we could take that pot of 722, is that right? 400, whatever, the pot, and divide it up between all municipalities, including those that belong to Alberta municipalities and those that belong to the Rural Municipalities Association. So that has not yet been decided. So yeah, I hope you attend Municipal Leaders Caucus to see some of our preliminary thoughts. And then we will be needing to work very closely with RMA to come to consensus. I think that's what McIver was really looking for, is consensus between all municipalities represented by our two associations to present to him on how to allocate that pot. Anything you want to add, Dan?
Yeah. I get unmuted. Yeah, just to kind of add just probably to reiterate what Kathy was mentioning. It's really your question. It's two different issues. One is the pot itself of money that's going to be allocated between municipalities, and we have been advocating about the 50% growth factor. So there's a constraint that the LGFF only grows by 50% of the provincial revenue. We think, of course, it should be 100%, and that's really the only growth factor that makes sense. We have chatted with both Minister Taves and Minister MacGyver, and both of them indicated that there is willingness, I guess, to consider and talk about it. So it's not, they haven't turned it down flatly. So we're going to keep at it and keep at it, needing that, trying to get that growth factor to be 100%. So that's the one issue. The second issue is exactly as Kathy talked about and what Minister MacIver was referring to last night, that it's 340 million that's starting for LGFF starting in 25. So it's 340 million. We have to figure out a way to allocate that between all the municipalities outside of Edmonton and Calgary, so the non-charter cities. So as Kathy said, that is going to be a big part of what we're doing at, we'll have a separate session set up at our Municipal Leaders Caucus on March 9th and 10th. And there's going to be a separate session there where we're going to present what the board has been discussing to probably create more fairness and equity and how that money is, that infrastructure money is allocated between the municipalities. So I think it's pretty important that members do come to that, because we'll be looking for your input and your thoughts. So yeah, that's the two issues that that we're working on. One is the total pot of the money, and the other is how that total pot of money gets allocated out between the municipalities. Thank you.
Thank you both for your answers. We do have one more question. It's from an anonymous attendee, and it is, I had to step out briefly. Was there any mention on high-speed rail? So I'm going to flip this back over to Clint to answer. Clint, I'm going to just mute myself.
Hi there. I just did a quick search of the fiscal plan, and there was no references to high-speed rail.
Thank you for that, Clint. So it does look like we may be getting to the end of our questions here, which is perhaps impressive. Oh, wait, one more question. Any investments in additional ambulance services? Good question, Ken. I'm looking around. We're all, okay, Rachel is willing to start. So I'm going to just mute myself here.
Hi, Ken. I know that is really top of mind for a lot of folks, and I'm gonna kick this off. But I know my colleague Jody is on the chat, and if I've missed anything, I'll count on her to add from my analysis. And I apologize in advance. I am going to have to read, because between her and Kelly, they led this part of the analysis. But I know this. We put this on page 7 of our priorities document, knowing what a big deal it is. So from our initial read of the budget, it looks like there's an additional 64 million for emergency medical services. So that is that's a positive investment. I think, again, to plug Municipal Leaders Caucus, we do have Alberta Health Services coming on Wednesday the 9th. And so I think I'm really hoping that they'll be able to use that time to discuss how that money will be deployed, and in particular, as part of their new 10-point plan to increase capacity. And of course, you know, for our members, there's the issue of funding, which I do think underpins everything, and then there's the question of how it's allocated and how the system works overall. So I think, again, that session and that discussion with Darren will be a really good chance to delve deeper beyond just the surface numbers, and hopefully he'll provide some clarity about exactly how that will be spent.
That's great. Thank you. I'm just going to pause to see if Jody wants to add anything, but I think you probably covered it. Oh, Jody popped on. Okay, turning my.
The only thing that I would add, if everyone's not aware, is that there an emergency medical services advisory committee was also formed, and Kathy is part of that, as I understand it. So, and that's sort of in conjunction with the 10-point plan, and yeah, they'll be following some of the recommendations of that committee. And it's a fast turnaround, as I understand it, only like a couple of months that the committee is going to sit. So we'll see what comes out of that as well. Thanks.
Thank you for adding that, Jody. That's great. We do have a few other questions popping into the chat now, so I'm just going to turn to James' question. Is there any indication on how the historic health spending will further assist bringing doctors back to Alberta, specifically staffing rural hospitals who have had ongoing emergency department closures? So thank you for that question. I am going to turn it over to Rachel to take a stab at that one. Thank you.
So this is another one that I'll start off and then let Jody add to. So the main focus when it comes to attracting, entertaining doctors, and we do have, again, knowing that this is a priority, we did put this in the priority list on page 7. And there is a new program called the Rural Education Supplement and Integrated Doctor Experience Program, which will provide $60 million for new family physicians over the next 3 years. But again, I know your question is also about emergency department closures. So this program targets family physicians which may not meet your specific need. So that's something, James, that we might need to flag and look into further. I know Jody leads our small communities committee and is looking at making our the April committee meeting really focused on health, especially on with the outcome, a lot of questions coming out of the outcome of the budget that we'll be able to dig into more, and so that's something that we'll be following. Very closely.
Thank you. I'll just flip it over to Jody now.
Sure. The only thing that I would add is while the reside program is certainly a good start, it only provides $6 million for 60 new family physicians over the next 3 years in identified communities. So there's like 15 identified communities. And so we'll have to see going forward if they continue this program or what happens with it, if they identify more communities beyond the 3 years, that kind of thing, or if they have other strategies in mind as well. So we'll definitely be following that closely, as Rachel mentioned.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jody. I'm going to turn to David's question now. David's saying, unfortunately, libraries were held again to the same rate they have received for many years. I'm sure most of our smaller libraries are struggling and could use more funding. Has there been discussion between Alberta municipalities and the provincial government about libraries? I will turn this to
Jody again.
Jody again.
I think you should just stay on the screen.
Sure, yeah. Yes, there has been discussions about libraries. Earlier, I guess it was the second half of last year, there was a review of the Libraries Act and the regulations. We haven't seen the outcomes yet of the review, but as part of that, Alberta Municipalities very diligently tried to bring up the discussion of the funding for libraries, but Alberta Municipal Affairs was very firm in saying that it would be staying flat and did not give any indication of when that would change. But we definitely are telling Municipal Affairs that our members are looking for more libraries funding. So thank you. Thank
you, Jody. I'm going to turn to Kara's question. Darren is a genius. We agree. Yes, he is. Very happy to have him. Would he be receptive in calculating the true value of dollars in regards to the cuts? A true financial flat is not flat with the application of inflation. Oh, Darren, I'll turn this to you and see what you can answer.
Sure, Kara, I appreciate the compliment. I'm not trying to figure out who's behind that message and if we've met. anyways, I would say that, yeah, certainly everyone understands. This has been an area of concern for many years for Alberta municipalities, particularly when the Blue Ribbon Panel, the McKinnon report came out. There was a focus on, funding per capita, but there's other measures to look at. And certainly when we talk about funding an account of inflation and reduction in purchasing power, it's certainly a conversation that needs to have. Alberta Municipalities has done some research on this. There is certainly the stats do tell us that there has been a considerable download or shortfall in funding over the years as a result of keeping funding flat. We talked about the policing grants have been flat, FCSS has been flat, library funding has been flat, and then of course a lot of the capital funding has actually declined over time. Yet over the last 20 years, we've seen CPI jump by about 50%. So there's considerable effects of keeping these budget line items flat. For municipalities. I can just say that the analysis, there has been analysis done and there is plans to release that information at some point in time. I just can't say when at this point in time. So thanks, Nicole.
Thank you, Darren. I'm going to turn now to Elaine's question. Elaine is wondering what has been the province's reaction to Alberta municipalities advocating on the grant in lieu of taxes. This is another download that is not experienced by municipalities that don't have hospitals, schools, etc. And I will turn this to or Jeff wants to take a quick stab at that one. Okay.
Sure. I guess the short answer is they haven't been particularly receptive to that. I guess I have heard the argument that something could be zero and that municipalities have no right to get any compensation for that from the province. So perhaps we should be happy with the 50% funding there at $30 million a year. So not particularly receptive to that. It's not that we haven't pushed too strongly on, but it has been raised in the past year. And it's the province has not been particularly receptive to having that conversation at least at this time. Yeah, and certainly, and we may not agree with that or be happy with that response, but do accept that as the position they presented to us over the last several months.
Thank you, Jeff. And I am just taking a look. There's no further questions in the Q&A box. And I believe everything else in the chat has been addressed. So I will maybe see if Kathy wants to say anything in goodbye to folks, if we can. Yeah. Well, no, you can, but I just want to see, I do have some closing comments, Kathy, but I wanted to give you perhaps an opportunity just to.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'll just mute myself.
Unscripted. Just a couple of times through this last hour, questions have been answered with, this will be further discussion at MLC. So March 9th, March 10th. A couple of times it's been linked in the chat. So the big focus at MLC will be about Alberta provincial policing. We have a couple hours dedicated to that, along with the decision on our position. We have some time allocated for ambulance and EMS conversations and a significant amount of time for LGFF conversations. So the big stuff happening at a Municipal Leaders Caucus this March. So I really hope to see many of you there. We've got capacity and room for a lot of people. So I'm really encouraging everybody to sign up and come see us in person, although there's an option for a hybrid as well. So I'll leave it with that, because a lot of the questions that you've asked today are going to be answered there in person and many others. So looking forward to seeing everybody there in person.